Hello, and this continues a series in which I'm discussing my political activism record. And you know, in 2012, I was an online volunteer with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, their electoral campaign, and they ran Gloria Riva for president. And the reason I supported Party for Socialism and Liberation was, number one, Ralph Nader had retired, and number two, I was deeply offended at the way that in 2008 the supporters of Barack Obama had branded all supporters of Ralph Nader as potential sympathizers of the Ku Klux Klan because we were obstructing the success of the first black president or whatever. Because of that, I was deeply offended. And then in 2011, I became radicalized with the participation of, under the influence of Occupy. I became radicalized. So in 2012, the logical conclusion, given all the factors, this choice for me was to volunteer with a Party for Socialism and Liberation in their 2012 electoral campaign effort. And in 2012 it was very tame. Nobody, and Ralph Nader was gone from the scene, so nobody really cared too much in 2012. If you opposed Obama from the left, we were just ignored, which was good because we were able to do our work unimpeded, pretty much. So the Gloria La Riva campaign didn't really achieve, visibility very much, but they achieved a measure of visibility online, and that was good. It is the fact that the Party for Socialism and Liberation ran to the left of Barack Obama is registered, right? So it's good, at least at least for that, that effort was good. Somebody stood up to Barack Obama on the left after Ralph Nader retired, right? And that somebody was somebody much more radical, somebody who wanted, or open advocates of socialist revolution. So somebody who, Party for Socialism and Liberation was the voice of the 99% against the 1%. The most consistent voice of the 99% against the 1% was Party for Socialism and Liberation in 2012, not Barack Obama. So 2013, in 2013, I became more focused on Sweden. Actually, between 13 and 18, I became focused on Sweden, in the situation in Sweden, because in 2013, I got involved with Action Mot Deportation, and Action Mot Deportation is a splinter from No Human is Illegal, focused on anti-deportation and anti-deportation activism, right? So very specifically, Action Mot Deportation was involved in the anti-Riva campaign, and Riva was a project of the Reinfeldt government in which the police were instructed to go into the tunnelbanan in Stockholm, the subway in Stockholm, and stop foreign-looking people and ask them for papers in order to weed out and catch undocumented persons. So what Action Mot Deportation did is they filmed where the police were, and then they would put the footage on Facebook so as to warn people, don't go to this station or don't go there, or like whatever. Like they had people watching many of the stations to make sure police were filmed, trying to catch undocumented, and then undocumented were told, don't use the tunnelbanan, right? Like stay away from the tunnelbanan and public transportation for a while and whatever. And they were told exactly where to not get on the subway, like which subway stations to avoid and whatever. So that was in one way in which Action Mot Deportation countered the Riva, anti-Riva activism, by alerting unsuspecting undocumented persons of the danger they were in. So and another thing that Action Mot Deportation was involved with was the activism to stop deportations to Afghanistan. So, for example, they organized boycott of Turkish airlines because the Swedish Migration Board and the Border Police were using Turkish airlines to effect deportations to Afghanistan. So there was a boycott of Turkish Airlines, Europe-wide boycott of Turkish Airlines. Eventually, Turkish Airlines backed off, and the Swedish Migration Board and the border police were, hired charter planes. But and also there is a very famous leaflet from the anti-deportation to Afghanistan effort, which is a leaflet that explains to passengers on Turkish airline planes that if they see that there is an undocumented person being deported, that they can take measures to prevent the plane from taking off. Like they can refuse to put their seatbelts on, or they can stand up and not sit down until the person is removed from the plane. Until the passengers are sitting down with their seatbelts put on and whatever, the plane cannot take off. So they were encouraging passengers to take action to stop deportations from inside the plane. And there's a leaflet about that, that I in the description I'm going to put a link to a video I made about a leaflet exhibit, where I show an exhibit of these leaflets. Yeah, and then also action with deportation was involved in obstructing the physical transportation of Afghans from the detention center at Kallred to the airport in Gothenburg, I think it was, or perhaps it was Stockholm. I forgot if it was in Stockholm or Gothenburg that they did this. I'm very, I forgot if it was Marsta or Kallred. But they obstructed. They put when the lorries carrying the Afghans to the airport came up, the activists would put their bodies on the road and block the road to prevent to disrupt the deportation system, physically disrupt. So the lorries had to stop, and the police had to come and remove the bodies one by one, and then the lorries would go. But by the time the lorries would get to the airport, they missed the flight, and it created all sorts of scheduling problems, which helped the Afghans stay longer or whatever, and hopefully then other things could be done. I don't know, to try to buy more time for the Afghans before they're refouled to the war zone or whatever. So yeah, that's action with deportation was a really good thing. And the anti-Riva activism and the activism trying to disrupt deportations to Afghanistan, the effort to try to get passengers in Turkish Airlines flights to not to take action to prevent the plane from taking off from the inside. That was really good too. But yeah, in 2014 though, I switched to in 2014 between 2014 and 2018, I was more focused on my activism, because I joined something called Christian Network. And Christian Network is was an informal effort by members of different Christian denominations in Sweden. And we were involved in clandestine anti-refoulement direct action, right? And originally, Christian Network was formed in order to help converts from Islam to Christianity in Sweden that were not being recognized as converts by the Swedish Migration Board, in total violation of Article 18 of the Declaration of Human Rights. But a lot of these people, if they were returned to countries they came from, they could face the death penalty, because it is in Islam, it is forbidden to apostatize. So originally, Christian Network was formed to get these people who were threatened with refoulement, and then put them out of harm's way outside of Sweden. So they they organized an underground railroad to smuggle people out of Sweden who were in danger of being refouled before they could be refouled, before the Gränspolisen. We basically took them from under from the clutches of the Gränspolisen and put them out of Sweden in a safe place. And my cabin where I lived in Hamaro, I lived in a cabin in Hamaro for 11 years. Between 14 and 18, I hid. My cabin became a station in the Underground Railroad, and I hid about 10 people between 14 and 18. I hit Moroccans, Afghans, a guy from a Congolese guy who eventually obtained the Italian passport. So one person that I helped, one person that stayed in the cabin in my cabin underground railroad station, eventually made it. He got an Italian passport. Um, but yeah, and there was also one guy from Georgia, one journalist from Georgia that we were helping because, um, and this is I want to preface this. Originally, the network was formed to help converts from Islam to Christianity, but later it got broadened to help people who were in need, people who were in danger of refoulement in general. So that's why, by the time I joined in 14, the network was already switching to the second model, as opposed to just focusing on Muslim converts to Christianity. They were now focusing on other groups of people who were also, threatened with refoulement. And yeah, and one of the things that motivated, to preface this, in 2012 and 13 was the black year for LGBTQI asylum seekers in Sweden, because during those years the Reinfeldt government deported, the Reinfeldt government collaborated with Putin. Reinfeldt collaborated with Putin. He refouled a gay man and a transsexual woman back to Putin's Russia. I think in 14 they deported a young girl, a 4-year-old girl, to Chechnya, who had a medical condition. I mean, in 2012 and 13, the Reinfeldt government, the moderate government, sent people to Putin's Russia, children and transsexuals to Putin's Russia, in which, it is pretty much well documented that, both Chechens and homosexuals in Russia, transsexuals in Russia, are persecuted minorities, but Sweden refouled them anyways. So, which is totally hypocritical, because today, after the Ukraine war started in 2022, the Swedish state cries crocodile tears about the Ukrainians and how horrible Putin is. But in 2012 and 13, they were fully collaborating with him, refouling people back. So, back to Russia. So, yeah. But anyways, and unfortunately, one of the things that actually, to just go back to action of deportation in 13, they used to, one of the things they did in their Facebook, their Facebook, they had a page where they had the pictures of all the couples that were threatened to be broken up, because the border police and the immigration board, they were breaking up established relationships. People who were married, their marriages and established relationships were being broken up. The spouses were being deported, and I mean, and sometimes couples who had children, one of the spouses was being deported. I mean, it was horrible. I mean, the migration board and the border police were breaking up families with deportation, with total impunity. And the action of deportation had a page where they had all the faces, pictures of all these couples, and most of them were heterosexuals, established relationships, people who were married for years, and their spouses were being deported. And unfortunately, I am one who was victimized by the Reinfeldt government in this manner. My fiance Yusuf was refouled in 2013. He was arrested we were supposed to be married in March of 2014 at Dobna Shirkan in Hamaro, and that was our plan. And the Gränspolisen came and arrested him in September of 2013. In October of 2013, he was deported to a country he was not from, a country that was embroiled in civil conflict, and as a result, Yusuf was killed in the violence. So in my case, not only did they destroy my relationship, they murdered my fiance. I mean, my fiance paid with his life for applying for asylum in Sweden. Okay, he received an effective death penalty for applying for asylum in Sweden, a country that claims and boasts that it abolished the death penalty years ago. but apparently not so for refugee asylum seekers who are refouled to war zones, as it happened with so many, Azari and Pashtun teenage boys who came from Iran and were sent to the war zone in Afghanistan. So Sweden doesn't really respect, any type of human rights, or anything. I mean, Sweden has a very sordid history with refoulement, and I found this out while being in Copenhagen and in Trondheim up in Norway. Up in Trondheim. I'm in Norway now, but up in Trondheim and down in Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, when I was there recently, in 2022, the comrades from DKU, Dansk Kommunistiska Ungdom, they told me that during the World War II, Danish Jews escaped to Sweden. When the Nazi Germany occupied Denmark, the Jewish population of Denmark fled. I mean, many of them fled before, but those who could pay for it embarked out of the country. But those who were too poor to pay for embarkment, they crossed over to Sweden, and then apparently to try to escape the Gestapo and the SS and Einsatzgruppen, and the precursor of the Swedish border police rounded these Danish Jews up and handed them back to the Gestapo in Denmark. So that's how Sweden cut its teeth. The precursor to the Swedish border police in the 1940s. That's how it cut its teeth. Refouling Danish Jewish people back to the Gestapo. A lot of those Jewish people from Denmark, Danish Jews, ended up being gassed in the Holocaust. So Swedish border control has a direct role in the Holocaust. The Swedish refoulement policy, long-standing policy of refoulement, augmented the number who were gassed in the final solution, as they returned Danish Jews to Jewish people to the Gestapo in Nazi-occupied Denmark. The same thing, members, I'm told in Trondheim, this was members of the DKP, the NKP, the Norwegian communists in Trondheim. They told me that during World War II, the Norwegian resistance, they would set up camps across the border in Sweden in the woods, and that the Swedish military would break up the camps, round them up, and hand them back to the Wehrmacht on the other side of the border. So that's another type of refoulement that the Swedish state engaged in. So I mean, Sweden has a long history of involvement in refoulement, gross acts of refoulement. Danish Jews and members of the Norwegian resistance. In a more recent period, as I was saying, in 2013 and 12, Russian gays and transsexuals, and 4-year-old girl, deported to Chechnya. Later on, Pashtun and Hazari boys who were, deported, who came from Iran and were deported to the war zone in Afghanistan. In a very recent period after, the election, now that Sweden is trying to join NATO and endear itself with the Erdogan government in Turkey, deportation of Kurds. They deported one Kurdish man directly into a Turkish prison, despite the fact that in Turkish prisons Kurds are brutally treated. So I mean, Sweden is a country that refouls people, has a long history of it. And there many Swedes would argue, well, we made up for what we did in World War II, because in World War II, Sweden supported the Axis until 1943. Right, Sweden facilitated, for example, the export of iron ore from Norway to Nazi Germany. The Swedish railway system was made available to facilitate those exports, etc. So, the King of Sweden at the time wrote a congratulatory message, a telegram to Hitler on the day of Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. So, I mean, Sweden was pretty much a sympathetic to Nazi Germany up to about 1943, when the Swedish state realized after the Battle of Kursk that the writing was on the wall for Hitler. Then they very skillfully made an about face and started to endear themselves with the British, right? But yeah, to like save their skin before the Reich collapsed, right? But and in the 70s and 80s, the Swedish state was an adamant opponent of apartheid South Africa and a supporter of the freedom struggle in South Africa, and in that way it sort of atoned for its sins during World War II. But now, this side of 2009, the Swedish state is once again returning to its roots as a refouler entity. As I've said, Russian gays and transsexuals, 4-year-old Chechen girl, scores of Pashtun and Hazari boys who were deported to the war zone in Afghanistan, Kurds deported to Turkish torture chambers. I mean, this is the Swedish state, right? That's the way it works. That's what the Gränspolisen does, and Migration Board. The Migration Board, and that is why I say Sweden should be expelled from the Convention of Refugees. Sweden should be expelled from the UN Convention on Refugees. Sweden should be expelled from the Child Convention, because very recently Sweden deported a 3-year-old boy to Africa. Sweden deports children. Sweden deports children. Sweden refouls people. I mean, and they feel entitled to do this with total impunity, and nobody does anything about it. So that's what I'm saying. The United Nations needs to take charge of the situation and expel Sweden from the Refugee Convention, and make it so that all Swedish negative decisions are null and void are declared non-binding opinions, null and void in the UN system, so that people can feel free to apply somewhere else. Because Sweden does not respect the spirit or the letter of the UN rules on asylum. Sweden does whatever it wants, and again, it bases itself on this extremist interpretation of sovereignty, that it feels entitled to do whatever it wants with migrants, and nobody does anything about it, because Sweden milks this fake humanitarian image that it has cultivated over the years to cover up what it does. So it's a really, really horrible situation with Sweden and refoulement. And really, the United Nations needs to take action on this, or somebody needs to take action on this, not to allow Sweden to continue to destroy people's lives. Like in the case of my fiancé Yusuf, he was killed as a result of Sweden refouling him, and Sweden got away with this. And it's not just my fiancé Yusuf. There's many others. How many teenage boys who were sent to the war in Afghanistan, deported to the war zone in Afghanistan, were they not killed or maimed? There was an Afghan NGO that was documenting what happened to the teenagers that were deported from Europe, especially from Austria and Sweden, and they documented what happened to many of them. Apparently a number of them managed to walk back into Iran, but not all. Many others didn't make it. What happened to those boys? Now the NGO that was documenting this, of course, disappeared, and I don't think they survived the collapse of the puppet government, the occupation puppet government, after the United States, retreated. And when the Taliban won the war in August 2021, the United States, fled. They left their equipment behind, for what I hear, and the Afghan puppet government collapsed. I don't think the NGO that was documented this survived. I don't think so. But yeah. Anyways, yeah. Anyways, yeah. But yeah, Sweden has a very sordid history with refoulement, and I mean, this is a tangent here, but okay, back to what I'm supposed to be talking about. 2014 to 18, I was organized with Christian Network, and I did what I could. I turned my little cabin into a station in the Underground Railroad. 10 people hid there, and that is the most significant thing I've ever done in my whole life. The most significant thing, because I helped 10 physical persons. As a result of my efforts, 10 physical persons were not refouled. So the Swedish border police refouled Yusuf, and he was killed, but I prevented them from refouling 10 others. So I feel that with that, I can live with that. I can live with what happened to Yusuf easier, because I took action. Christian Network allowed me to take action that enabled me to, do something. You can never undo death. I mean, Yusuf is dead, and dead is dead, and you can never undo that. Nobody can bring him back except God. In the rest, I believe he's in the spirit world somewhere. That's a separate issue, but I want to believe that. I don't have any evidence there's a spirit world, but I want to believe there is, because I want to believe that he's there somewhere. But yeah, you know, I feel that I can live with the fact that he was refouled and killed, because I work with Christian Network and I helped these 10 people. One of them, the Congolese one, got a Italian passport. So yeah, that's even a better accomplishment.